So today I'm going to be talking about the new analytics of web governance, and I guess one way it's kind of a misnomer because it's not really new. A lot of this stuff is stuff you're doing already. It's just the technology and the range of tools that's available that's new. But in fact, the things that you're doing, the things that you're applying them for, so you're using data and knowledge and analytics really to look at how well you're delivering on the promise of web governance. Now, as we'll see in a few moments, web governance is really how well you manage your site in a controlled and orderly way in order to create the stability you need to deliver on the promise of web governance and deliver on your goals. And of course, that's very easy when you're on a small scale site because pretty much you probably know everybody who works on your site, which means that when you're looking at the main areas of analytics, you just go and talk to somebody. So you probably don't know it, but you're kind of looking at three different areas, and we'll be covering these in more detail later on and see how they relate to some of the new analytics products. But you may look at some of your online indicators, say, well, okay, my team is still developing a lot of stuff for online. How well is that being done? What's the quality of it? Is it, good readability, good kind of basic error checking? Am I delivering on that very basic minimum level standard that I would expect from a well-equipped team? Then also you look internally at the team itself and say, okay, well, how well are we carrying out our tasks in the way we do stuff? Are we delivering on time, on budget? Do we have good relationships with our internal stakeholders who often work on whose behalf we're working? And then also for the organization itself, i.e. the governance system I set up on a project management level. How good is it to work here? We're getting a lot of investment from our organization. Are we delivering on that investment? Are we getting good ROI? Are we doing things in a safe way so we're not engaging in any kind of risky activities that could put the organization at risk? And then also just in terms of staff, do people like working here? How can I measure that? Do I just go and ask them if I have a small scale team? And then also measure things like staff turnover. So I may be able to deliver really good quality stuff to users of the site, have a great user experience, have a great relationship with internal stakeholders in terms of the people I'm working with, on whose behalf I'm delivering content. Then if I see that there's high staff turnover, that could be indication that there's something wrong with my governance system itself. So as I said, on a small scale site, that's pretty easy, it's just you, maybe a few internal people and a few external people helping out in that. But the problem is, as scale of the site grows, so as you start to do more things online, so you get bigger, you get more complex, and you get more engagement, it becomes harder and harder to keep linked with your kind of front-end operations. And maybe your own role, maybe you start off in the web team initially, but as you start to grow and scale, you start to step back from day-to-day operations. So you take more of a coordination and managerial role. And what that means is you get a kind of a fog of uncertainty, which you might like the kind of fog effect I have going on the screen there. It's been there all day. I don't know what that is, but anyway, it's really, really funny. But you get this kind of fog of uncertainty descending over your team where you're trying to track the impact of the governance decisions you make, but actually it's hard. And part of the problem is that over the last number of years, the technology of online management hasn't really kept pace with the scale of the management challenge itself. So at the front end, we've seen a lot of really good development. So there's been great advances in terms of user interfaces and user interface technologies like Ajax and things like apps. There's apps for almost everything. But none of this has really happened at the back end. You've really had to rely a lot on manual intervention. Then there's been some tools that you can use. Okay, we have a content management system, but forgive me guys, in the early days some of them were quite clunky, and you required a lot of intervention, manual intervention. Okay, that's starting to change. But it's been a long time to get there. But I guess now we're starting to see maybe the fruit of that time lag. We're starting to see more tools coming online. This is just a graph. Gartner actually hosted a webinar last night where they're talking about quite a similar area, which is the technology of digital marketing and how you're starting to see so many different tools emerging, and then also how you can cross them over and see. They have this concept of a digital marketing hub there at the center, where technology coming from many different areas, whether it's web analytics or social media monitoring and loads of other areas, they can start to link that data together and get a bigger view of what's going on in your digital marketing space. And the same thing is happening for web analytics too. And I guess that has a number of benefits. The first major benefit, obviously, with all these new tools coming online, dissipates that fog. And by doing so, or as part of that, it also allows you to get labor savings. So very simple stuff like link checking and broken, or link checking and misspellings and all that type of stuff. You don't want to have your content creators spending loads of time on that, and it's great to get a tool that can do that for you. So labor saving is a major advantage. But then also you get, I guess, the kind of layer on top of that, kind of the cream on the cake, is that once you're doing all this automated activity, you're actually collecting loads of data, and what that can do is help you with decision support, particularly when you're getting that data from many different angles. So you'll be able to triangulate insights, maybe from your web analytics, then from your QA, your Siteimprove product, and maybe from your Clarity Grader product, for Fergal was talking about. You can get different angles and stuff, and that allows you to come to analyze web governance in a way you never could before. And really in two ways. The first way is that rather than relying on, if you find you have a problem on your site, rather than always going back to the usual suspects of design and content, and the only real reason we do that is because they're the ones that are easiest to measure, because everyone's kind of familiar and used to web analytics now. So if something goes wrong with your site, you go to web analytics, you go, oh, looks like maybe we did something wrong, the content or design there, and that's where you focus all your activity. Whereas in fact, maybe your design or content or the decisions that led to those are fine. It was actually something to do with the quality of the delivery itself. Maybe your web team wasn't up to the job. Maybe the processes that are following are flawed. Maybe they're not fully documented. Or maybe something else outside of their control, but they don't have the skills they need, they don't have the time they need, they don't have leadership or budget. So one of the major advantages of this new suite of web governance analytics, it allows you to move beyond those usual suspects and actually interrogate web governance itself. And then secondly, and probably more excitingly, is it allows you, as I said, to triangulate data from many different sources to come to better decisions about how you allocate those very limited resources that you have for managing your website to places where they're best used. So we'll look at this example a little bit later on, but basically what it's showing is we have Siteimprove here, we have web analytics, we have Terminal 4, we have social media marketing, we have other tools there, and then we have a number of people who are delivering on our behalf. Actually, we shuffle budget and people around to get the best return on that. And the analytics we're drawing in from these many sources, if we can use them in an intelligent way, and maybe people like Terminal 4 can help with this in the future, we can arrive at that kind of level of stability, or that kind of nirvana that really is what it promises. So that's kind of the short kind of intro, but now we're going to get into the depth of it. I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to define, starting off with web governance, because there's a bit of debate about what that actually means, and then we're going to talk about the analytics of web governance themselves. So just before that, a little bit about me. So I've been involved in web since about 2009. I got into my first major large-scale web governance management role in about 2002 with ESB, the utility here in Ireland. At that time, I was fishing around for frameworks and models to help me organize all the many disparate activities and resources to do with managing a large-scale site. Couldn't really find anything at the time, so I started coming to conferences like this, reading whatever literature was available, pulling the best ideas together, and just started writing about it. I wrote a book about it a number of years ago, which I know if you follow me on Twitter, you actually will get your free copy, don't worry. More recently, I set myself up as an independent web consultant, kind of building on the web governance framework that I've constructed, and doing stuff like this and cooperating with people like Siteimprove. And just as an aside, for the last number of months, myself and Siteimprove, we've been collaborating on a series of online training videos in web management. They'll be coming out in the near future, so just keep an eye out for those. So that's about me. So let's talk about web governance now. The big question is, well, what is it? How do you define web governance? And this is where I turn it over to you. Would anyone like to have a go at defining web governance for me? Yeah, I didn't think so. Well, actually, there's a fair bit of debate and discussion about it. So you get people who take quite a narrow approach and then quite a broad approach. Now, I would put myself in the broad definition camp. But there are people, and there's a particular commentator called Lisa Welshman, some of you might be familiar with her. She has a definition which is quite narrow. She says that web governance is about the decisions and the process by which we make decisions for web, which is fine, and that kind of aligns with some definitions for IT governance, really just about how you arrive at very basic structures of web, and then everything else after that is operations. She's not really concerned about that. I put myself in the early camp, the broad camp, and there's two reasons for that. The first kind of goes back to my own kind of genesis in web governance when I came into ESB. So I was looking at this huge amount of activity, all these processes, all these people, all the technology, and there's more stuff over here, and you're kind of going, oh my God, like how do I even structure and start to think about all this stuff? Is there a way that I can kind of draw a line around and say, okay, all this stuff here is web, and this is what I'm going to concern myself with, but I'm not going to concern myself with that because that's not web. And the fear is that, wherever you draw that circle around stuff, there's going to be something that you miss. There's going to be something outside. It's going to have an impact on the site someday. It's going to come and bite you in the ass, and you're going to get a call from the CEO. So what you want to do is have a broad enough definition that everything that should be in is in, but it's not so broad that you're including stuff that really is beyond your remit. So, but for that reason, I adopted a broad definition, and then it's also been reflected in my interactions with people like yourselves. So when people come to me and they ask questions about web governance, yeah, they ask about questions like leadership and then arriving at strategic decisions, as Lisa would say. But also they talk about a lot more. It's like, how do I structure my teams? How do I allocate roles and responsibilities so people aren't at each other's throats all the time? Or how should I document processes? Or even what are all these things I should be doing? I'm doing these things, but should I be concerning myself with this other stuff as well? So I see that idea of a broad definition of web governance reflected in their concerns too. So for that reason, I adopt this broad definition, which is to say web governance describes everything you need to do to manage a website in a controlled and orderly way in order to deliver the stability that you need to do the more important stuff, which is focus on your online goals. So really it's about setting that firm foundation and say, look, I don't need to worry about basic readability, basic quality. I know everything in terms of content. I'm not going to have any misspellings. I'm not going to have any broken links. I'm going to have basic levels of interaction. That's all fine. I can take that as read. Now I can focus on putting my resource into this part of the site over here where I can really build that content and make it excellent. But everything else is looked after. So it's about that stability, that firm foundation upon which you can build the success of your site. Now you could say, well, that definition is so broad as to be practically unmanageable. And in some ways fine, because there's so many different tasks involved with online, and they're supported by so many resources that you're going, oh my God, well, how can I organize that? But when you get right down to it, you find that all these disparate tasks and activities can actually be brought together in terms of just 3 components, and that's, as you'll see here. So this is what I call my web governance framework. And what it does is it takes all the activities, all the resources connected with online, organizes them into just a few components, and then we have this concept of website scale, which allows you to arrive at predictions about how the governance of your site should be configured in order to support the scale of your site. So the way it works is, at the top we have activities, so no matter what type of website you have, no matter how big or small it is or what it's about, you do these 4 activities. The first is leadership, so that's how you set strategy, set resourcing, and set your governance rules. Secondly, we have development, so that's the processes or the system and activities by which you create a new site or add a significant new section to an existing site. For example, a project between 14 to 18 months would be typical. Then we have maintenance, that's really the day-to-day management of the site, so day-to-day publishing, day-to-day QA, day-to-day engagement, feedback, day-to-day technical performance monitoring, etc. And then finally we have infrastructure, which is about creating a secure and stable technical environment upon which the entire site can be built. So there are the activities of governance, and each of those contains a number of subtasks. So you do the activities, and then to support the activities you need to invest in a number of resources. So there are 4 key resources. You have people, processes, tools, and budget. So people is, well, what skills do I need? Then of those skills, how many skills? I.e., how many people do I need manpower? How should I structure those people into teams? And then how do I allocate roles and responsibilities? Again, so everyone knows what they're doing and not stepping on each other's toes. Processes, well, that's the things they do and how they do them and the documentation to support them. Tools, that's a lot of what we'll be talking about later on. So tools like content management systems, then analytics, and then analytics of web governance, and etc. And then finally budget, of course, which supports everything. And then we have this concept of scale in the middle, which is really kind of an attempt to answer the question. People come to you and say, hey man, how big is your website? You go, well, how do you describe it? You can say, well, it's the number of pages I have online, but that can essentially be meaningless because you could have 1 million pages with just a paragraph on each page. Or maybe it's meant of data you have, but again, that data could be just clumped into loads of very massive video files, or maybe it's amount of data that you process. There's lots of different ways you can measure that. So rather than talk about size, look at this concept of scale, which includes 3 parameters when put together result in a management burden, which then has an impact on the granularity of the 4 activities and then on the sophistication of the resources. So the way it works is, first you measure the scale of your site, which is to decide how big, busy, and complex it is. Now the way we define these, I don't have too much time to go through that, which is a lot on my website about it. So big is, say, how much effort it takes to manage the 4 content complexity and volumes on your site. And busyness is about the levels of engagement. So that will be the visitors you get to your site and how much they interact with you in terms of commentary, shares, all that type of stuff. And then thirdly, we have complexity, which is the technical foundations of the site and any content technology on your site. And when you put those three things together, you arrive at this measure of scale. So let's say I arrive at my measure of scale, then from that I can make a prediction of the amount or the degree of granularity of the activities. So if I have a large-scale site, that is to say that it's a very complex technology, so it includes practically everything. It has login, personalization, that is for financial transactions, very complex, very large in size. That is, has lots of complex content. It doesn't necessarily have to be text because we're just measuring effort needed to produce content. We're not measuring volumes of content itself. It's the amount of time and manpower needed to produce it. Very large amount of effort needed to manage or to create that content, and then activity, that's the visitors, volumes of visitors, I guess, and the level to which they engage. So if I have a lot of each of those, I've got a large-scale site. That implies then that the four key activities of governance are going to become very granular. That is, they occur very frequently and are very detailed. And then to support that level of granularity, I need to have very sophisticated resources, which means I need lots of people. I need to give them extensive tools. They need to follow formal processes, and they need to have a large budget to support it all. So it's those three steps that you can follow to kind of highlight the predictive qualities of the web governance framework. And I have a couple of examples of how it can work. So first is using my own site, which is unfortunately quite a small scale site. So if I measure the scale of that website, well, in terms of content, it's got about 100 pages, pretty low volumes there. I add to it every couple of weeks. In terms of traffic, it's unfortunately quite low. That's going to change after today, right? So, and then in terms of technology, it's quite basic. So it's really just brochureware content or brochureware kind of web server. So I have got a small scale site based on those three measures. Then I immediately know, well, if I have a small scale site, that means the management burden is going to be quite low. So the activities of governance, so leadership, development, maintenance, and infrastructure, the activities associated with each of those, they're not going to occur very frequently. Even when they do, they're going to be fairly simple. So they occur infrequently, and they're quite simple, which means that the granularity is low. And then if the granularity is low, it means, yeah, I can predict that I'm not going to need that many people to support the site. And indeed, people I do need, the skills that need, not so detailed, quite broad skills will be fine. They only have to follow quite informal processes. In terms of tools and technology, well, shareware, freeware, that's fine. And then in terms of budget, again, quite a low budget. So really just based on an initial measure of scale, I can already start to arrive at predictions for what the governance systems to support this site are going to be. Then we can go to the very other end of the scale. So this is Vodafone.co.uk, site I would have been familiar with before. So if I measure the scale of this site, I know, okay, lots of content. So there's lots of different types of format of content and very high volumes. And it's being constantly produced. In terms of traffic, very heavy traffic, over 1 million visitors a month. And then lots of engagement in terms of commentary, sharing, tweets, all that type of stuff. And then the complexity of their technology, well, goes without saying, they've got every type of technology going. So they've got a very large scale online operation. Therefore, I can make an immediate prediction that the four activities of governance are going to be very granular. That is, they're going to be very detailed, and each task is going to emerge as a distinct subtask requiring its own support. That is, I'm going to need resources that are sophisticated, expensive, and lots of management. So lots of people organizing the teams with formal roles and responsibilities, following documented processes and with formal documentation supporting that. In terms of tools, very complex and sophisticated tools, everything again from content management systems through to Photoshop for designers through to supportive tools like Siteimprove, Clarity, whatever else is going, and then of course a massive budget to support it all. So again, we see just on the basis of three measures, we can start to make immediate predictions for the type of governance I need to support a site at any scale. And the good thing about that concept is, again, that it's comprehensive. It includes everything to do with the site, so everything I need to do and all the resources needed to support it. It's scalable for a site of any size, big or small, and then also for any industry. And that actually leads to the final kind of advantage of this framework is that you can use it to make comparisons between industries, sites between industries of any type. I don't have it illustrated here, but there's two sites, BHS and Macmillan in the UK. In the past, I've measured the scale of them, both actually equivalent in scale in terms of amounts of content, traffic, and then complexity. Very, very similar. Now you might say, well, BHS, that's like a for-profit online retailer, and Macmillan, that's a non-profit, a cancer charity. But they're so different, such different industries, there's no way we can make comparisons in their web governance approach. But actually, because they share the same level of scale, you can see, well, the granularity of the activity you're going to manage is going to be the same, and therefore we're going to arrive at very similar governance solutions. You're going to need approximately the same numbers of people with approximately the same skills Notwithstanding, they have some differences, but approximately the same. They're going to both need formal processes supported by formal documentation, and they're going to need a kind of equivalent specialization and sophistication of tools, and then approximately the same budgets. So notwithstanding the fact that they're in very different industries, you can use the same model to actually make predictions about similarities. So that's the concept of website scale, and in terms of how you kind of use concepts like this, and then also how you use some of the emerging technologies that support the insight you need to understand whether your web governance system is stable or not. It's useful to think about web governance progression or maturity in terms of 3 steps. So a lot of organizations are still kind of at the first stage of the maturity roadmap, and that they're really just trying to grapple with this whole idea of, well, what is web governance? I'm trying to manage my site. How can this concept of web governance help me? Well, you can use that type of framework to kind of put order into complexity. So all the things that you need to do, okay, I can find a home film within each of these 4 major activities. And all the things I need to support, or all the things I need to invest in, the people, the roles I use, the technology I buy for my team, I can find a place for them within each of the 4 resources. And it just gives you a conceptual model just for going, okay, right, now I get it, now I kind of understand it. And then once you've achieved some degree of understanding, you can get to the point where you can start to use its predictive qualities and say, right, I understand the management challenge I have now, and I have quite a large management burden now I want to organize. So I want, for each of those 4 resources at the bottom, I want to hire the right people, give them the right roles and responsibilities, give them the right tools, etc. And then once you've got to that stage, you're kind of getting to a level of stability. You're kind of going, right, okay, it looks like I'm broadly the right people, I'm broadly the right roles. People aren't really at each other's throats anymore. We do have some leadership in place. I'm not kind of constantly scrapping around for pennies at the back of the city. I actually have a decent budget now as well. So you're kind of in that stable place, and then you can start to use insight from the from the governance analytics software that we're going to explore next to start optimizing your web governance systems. And then just by having them reorganized, because sometimes maybe as a result of a major reorganization or a merger with another firm, you might have to go back and look at your web governance again. So now let's look at the web governance analytics. And it's useful at this point just to remind ourselves that we're not doing web governance for the sake of doing web governance. We're doing it for another reason. Web governance is not an end in itself, it's merely a means to an end. And a useful way to think about it is like the engine of a car. It's like when you buy a car, or at least when I buy a car. I don't buy it because I want to put my head under the hood all the time and become, oh, what an amazing engine, tuning it up and all that. No, I buy it because I want to get from A to B, and I have a certain expectation it's going to work when I get in and turn the engine. It's going to be there ready for me. And it's the same way in your organizations where people come to you and they say, hey, I want to do a major new development for Christmas that's coming up, and I need you to help me put it live. They don't want to know about all your internal problems about leadership and designers in conflict with content creators. No, they just want you to get the job done. It's your responsibility to try and make sure you have that stability, that kind of level playing field that you can use the opportunity that the engine gives you, that vehicle gives you to deliver on their requirements. And just like with the well-tuned engine of a car or with a vehicle that has recognizable features in that, I don't know, it's the right miles per gallon or emissions or whatever it is, a well-tuned governance system also has a number of recognizable features. So if you're doing web governance right, you should see some of the following things. First, that all the activities and all the sub-tasks within those activities are being done. That is, there's no gaps. Now, again, I don't have time to go through it today, but each of those 4 activities has a number of subtasks. And again, no matter what type of site you manage, whether it's education, whether it's industry, whether it's profit, non-profit, all of those tasks need to be done. If you miss any of those tasks, you're potentially opening up a risk, and that could have an impact either on the online experience, on the organizational experience, or the operational experience of your governance system. And they also should be done to the right level of granularity based on the measure of your scale of your site. Second, you should have the right numbers of people, of course, with the right skills and appropriate tools. You have rigorous, reproducible processes that can be audited in the case of things go wrong. You have the right tools supporting those people, of which are web governance analytics tools, and then of course you have the budget in place. That's really just saying, okay, I have, based on a measure of the scale of my operation and the management burden I know I need to cope with, I have all the activities being done, and I have all the resources properly configured to support that, so everything's just about right. And that stability, just like in the engine of a car, can be measured by kind of your dashboard of indicators. So when you turn on the key in a car and the lights come on, and you know when something's going wrong, so the red light starts to flash. It's the same as with web governance. So we looked at these before. So the first thing you look at is the online indicator. So you have this web governance machine, and you can measure the health of your web governance based on the quality of the outputs of that machine. So your online indicators are things like Is the website I'm producing, is it basically functional, is it basically usable, is it basically accessible? We often set ourselves these massive transformative goals, say, well, I want to have the best of everything. Well, that's fine, but underlying all that, okay, let's look at just a page of content. You might want it to be the most amazing piece of content ever written for the web, but putting all that aside, is there any error spelling? Is there any misspellings? Or do all the links work? Is it basically meeting a basic level of readability? And then let's talk about how amazing else is going to be. But really, governance is about just setting that absolute baseline. So you can measure it in that quantitative way for lots of different activities of governance, and then also in qualitative, so you'll know from users, by direct feedback or online surveys, whether it's meeting their minimum expectations about what the quality of your site should be like. Similarly for internally, so this is kind of looking at the governance engine itself, so the people, processes, tools, etc., how well they're working. A good way of measuring that is, well, talking to your internal stakeholders, and then also looking at your own project management or MIS analytics, saying, well, am I delivering according to expectations with the right speed, the right quality, the right cost, in a reproducible way, in an auditable way? And when I talk to my internal stakeholders, do they like working with my team? Or is my team easy to get on with? Do they respond to phone calls? Or do the meetings run well? If they come to me with a request this month and then they come back to me next month, I'm able to follow the same type of process in the same type of auditable way, resulting in the same quality output. And then finally, we have these organizational indicators, which is at the very high level. So the company's making an investment in my team. Am I giving them an adequate return on that? I'm not engaging in risky behavior. And then also my staff, do they like working here? What's staff retention like? So you can be on a site which delivers really well on some of these parameters, but then falling down on another one. That could be an indication of something wrong in your web governance. So here's examples of that. So you can either look at it at a high level or take one example. So let's say the example of content. So the very basic that you're looking for is that, okay, 100% error-free, high readability, good SEO. Some of the feedback you might get, yeah, clear information about a difficult topic, this is good. People seem to like working with you internally, and staff seem to be happy, great place to work, low risk. So that's a good indication. Yeah, it looks like the governance system I've created, all the things I do, so all those 4 activities, and the people I've invested in, how I've structured the roles and responsibilities, the team structures I've made, the tools I've given to do it, and the budget that we have in place, looks like that's probably okay, because I'm getting really good indications from my 3 major indicators that things are going well in terms of the deliveries, in terms of internal operations, and in terms of the overall project management or organizational indicators. And these indicators then, this is where the new analytics of web governance is really showing its own, because you're adding to this. No longer do you have to kind of guess or hope that things will go well when you make a governance decision. And again, we have that fog because it's difficult sometimes to measure because the tools aren't there. The tools now are there, and increasingly will be there in the future. So we have the ones that we're familiar with, content management, we have Siteimprove, link checking, basic QA tool, but then we're seeing new tools come onto the market. I mean, a great example is Virgo's Clarity Grader. Like, for the first time, you can go in and not only check if your content is really, it's well spelled and it's, basic in terms of link checking, but actually you can actually check things like readability automatically. Wow, it's amazing. It means that you've got more data to use in terms of not the quality of the output. Remember, putting yourself in the shoes of a web manager. You're trying to understand, well, how am I allocating my resource? Should I be allocating the resource better? Yeah, I've got really good, you might have really good quality content on the site with really high readability, but what that's telling you is that I've done things right internally. I've allocated that resource well because I'm getting a very good return on it, and it's creating a good experience. But your primary indicator is from this very small pot of money, you want to spend it in the right way. And you're seeing very good indicators in each of these. That means you are spending money well. Again, that links in with what Gartner was saying about a similar area of digital marketing management. What I kind of hope to see over the years is that something like they have their digital marketing hub. Here we see something like a web governance analytics hub emerging. So we can take indicators from many different angles and start to cross-pollinate, cross-fertilize data and start to see more insights about both problems in our governance systems and then opportunities for doing new things. That's just our hype cycle. It indicates where each of those tools is on the hype cycle. Now, it's when those analytics and indicators go bad that it can show you where things may be going wrong in web governance. So, for example, some of the things you might see from the front end, you get lots of errors per readability, or within the engine itself, late delivery, shoddy work, things are expensive, or you see a very high turnover of staff. This is indicative that something potentially is wrong with your web governance. Doesn't mean it always problems with your web governance, but potentially with your web governance. And so you need to start investigating where that might be the case. So you need to follow an audit trail. So the first thing you do is check, well, are all my activities being done? If they aren't being done, it potentially indicates, well, okay, somebody's either overlooking that task or maybe I haven't allocated to somebody to do. Secondly, identify if people who I've told to do that task have the right skills to do the job or the right time. And then if they don't have the right skills, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I haven't allocated that task to the right person, or maybe I need to hire somebody to do it. And also I need to identify how rigorous the process is. Maybe the process has been under-documented and they're just kind of doing it on the fly. Maybe that's my fault, or else they're just ignoring the process as well, and that's a disciplinary issue. In terms of tools, I haven't given them the right tools to do the job. And if not, why not? Again, a lot of that might come down to me. And then finally, budget. In terms of how I'm trying to support this entire governance system overall, do I have the right funding in place to do it? So that's the audit trail you follow. But as I said, the diagnosis isn't always that simple. I've seen examples of this myself where a team delivers really good online experience. It has a great relationship with its internal stakeholders, but massive churn on the team. People just absolutely hate working there. They just keep leaving all the time. So just keep hiring and firing excellent people. Not because they're not doing great work, but because it's just under way too much pressure. And that's indicative that the leadership element of the web governance model is flawed. Something needs to change. But then, more interestingly, once you get to that level of stability, the new analytics of web governance can be used to help you optimize your online management. So let's imagine a scenario down the road. We don't have this at the moment, but I hope Terminal 4's ears are open to this. Imagine you log into your content management system and you see, right, you can either click on a page or click on a nominated content contributor. And when you click on that, you see all the different data associated with that. So let's say we have two different content contributors here. Let's call them, Alice over here and Bob over here. And you click on each of them and you look at Alice's content. And you know in your head, well, I've allocated, these are two different content contributors. Maybe they're external contractors, okay, that you've hired in maybe for, creating content for Christmas. They're producing approximately the same types of content, and you're being paid approximately the same fee. But you click on Alice and you see, right, I've logged into the content management system. I can see all Alice's content. I can see from the content management logs how often she's been coming in and updating it in the system. I can look at the Siteimprove analytics and see, okay, has she got high levels of errors or low levels of errors? I can look at her web analytics and see how well that content is being interacted and engaged with. I can see from my social or from my digital marketing analytics whether that content is being commented on, whether it's being highly rated, whether it's being shared or retweeted, etc. Based on all that, I can make a judgment of the quality of the deliverables that Alice has given. Then I go and look at Bob. I go in and do the exact same thing. I click into Bob in the content management system. I see how often he's been logging into the system. I can see from Siteimprove whether the quality is high or low. Let's say the quality is low for poor old Bob. He's got lots of errors, loads of misspellings, lots of broken links, just really sloppy work. I can see his content isn't being interacted with as much, and I can see that people aren't either commenting on it or rating it badly, and they're not resharing or retweeting or anything like that. And I know in my head that both these external contractors, I'm paying them the same for approximately the same type of work. Well, what does that lead to? It tells me that I need to change how I'm making my decision making here. I should allocate more resource from Bob over to Alice because she's for the exact same fee doing far better work. And this is how the analytics of web governance in the future may be able to assist us make these better decisions about how we take that limited pot of money and that within that web governance framework I described, get better return on the investment from the activities and also from the supporting resources. And so with that in mind, David, I'll expect that in the next release. And just in terms of people who are doing this well, I'm sure you guys from the UK know about gov.uk. They're just doing an amazing job and they publish a lot about this and they're starting to do intelligent things like that. So, I really recommend that you dig into those. That's it. Thanks.